with us today, these folks and everybody else in the room. Andrés, Duany from DPZ and Company, Hazel, Borys from PlaceMakers, Gianni, Longo from ACP Visioning and Planning, Eliza Harris from Cannon Associates, and Ben Brown, a consultant and with PlaceMakers. And I'm Bill Lennertz. I'm the director of the National Charette Institute, and I've got my faculty member and board member David Brain from New College and NCI in the room. David teaches courses as well as I do. So welcome. I've been anticipating this session since last year at the Congress when we had an open source session and a salon on this subject, and now we've organized it into a formal session. This is really sort of a 301 or beyond discussion. I'm going to talk a little bit about charrettes, but mostly we're going, what it is, just to frame it so you all know kind of the state of the art from NCI, but then I want to open it up to this discussion. So why we're here is because budgets are shrinking, can't afford the big 7-day charrettes as much as we used to. There's an explosion of high-tech tools, social media, web-based distance participation, opportunities and challenges with those things, and there seems to be, in some areas of the country at least, an increase in organized, putting it nicely, an increase in organized citizen participation. It can be a lot worse than that. So just a few slides to set up, let you know where NCI is. We are, by the way, we're a nonprofit organization. We teach people and do research in best methods of charrettes, and I'm going to explain that a little bit. Lately, I've been talking to people about charrettes like wedding planning. So why do I do that? Because NCI teaches not just what happens at the altar, but everything you have to do in that year ahead of time. My niece is getting married, and I'm painfully aware of the thing that family is going through a whole year ahead of time. Getting the people together, God help you if you don't invite the right people, the seating arrangements, all the preparation that has to be done to pull off a successful wedding. And I could go on about the circles of involvement, and people are involved at different points in time, and there's a group that's always involved through the whole thing, but the parallel is quite close. But the reason I show it is because we're teaching people how to plan weddings, if you will. We're teaching you how to think of the whole project, not just the charrette. And it's all about making sure it works right. We teach courses all over the place. And so, a snapshot of our system that we are here. Okay, by the way, this is a research project for NCI. We are going to be taking notes and taking this stuff back and looking at our curriculum based on what we hear today. So I need to tell you a little bit about where we are so we can see what to do with it. We teach a 3-phase approach, 2 projects, where the charrette or some form of it is the kind of big bang. And maybe these could be handed out. This is our cheat sheet of our curriculum, which has 3 phases, sub-phases, and tools within those sub-phases. But basically the idea is that 1 to 9 months before the charrette, you're doing a lot of work to make sure the wedding's going to come off. You're doing the people part and the data part. Because we find that things go wrong when you don't, well, not all the time, but the preventions of a post-charrette meltdown can be headed off by good work ahead of time in terms of the people and the data collection. So it's getting all the right people together and all the right data together. In our courses, we teach people how to analyze and assess projects and how to plan the charrette. So very quickly, how it goes is that in charrette preparation, we have various analytical and organizational tools for a project, which again have to do with the people and the data. We talk about 3 levels of involvement, from primary stakeholders to secondary stakeholders to general stakeholders, and the real trick in the whole thing is making sure that everybody is involved at the right points in time. More people are involved in the middle, more often, more or less on the edges, but at different feedback loops, everybody is there. We create roadmaps for projects in the 3 phases with all the chores that have to be done ahead of time. The charrette itself, our definition at NCI, is a multiple day event that gets everybody involved to create a feasible plan that can really transform a community. And we talk a little bit about it in terms of the magic of the charrette as, you know, being able to transform systems the same way you transform water to steam by putting it in a pot and turning up the heat and kicking it over 211 degrees. And so we talk about that ability of it to transform systems. And there are work cycles that happen in any charrette, whether it's over a series of days or, as we'll talk, maybe over a series of months, that begins with some visioning. A team creates alternative concepts. There's a feedback loop. Refine the plan to preferred plan. Another feedback loop. Develop that plan and then present that plan. So feedback loops, key to the charrette, and it produced detailed solutions of the type you've seen all throughout the CNU. And then don't forget, after the charrette, to keep up with the communications, to refine your product, to hold a few meetings afterwards, and to really do a good job at a report. So there in 3 minutes is my 3-day course. We have principles of the charrette, some of which we started with here today. The principles that we've had over the years are to work collaboratively, design cross-functionally, use the compressed work session, use the short feedback loops. When you're designing, go from scales, detail, and large scale. Focus on feasibility. Use design as your tool. Conduct a multiple-day charrette, and hold that charrette on or near the site. So that's my very quick overview of where NCI has been. Now, in the face of these things, since our last Congress, I'll tell you a little bit of what we've done to open the discussion. In the face of these things, we have included in we're getting more hip because we came out of a very low tech. I started doing charrettes with Andrés back in 1986, and we had no computers. We drew it by hand. Maybe we had Excel. So we're teaching things like keypad polling, touch tables. We're talking about, we're modeling some providers that do a good pre-charrette distance participation, such as Open City Hall, the Mind Mixer people, and the Crowd Bright people. By the way, you can get a copy of this. I'll send you a PDF of this thing I'll send around an envelope, put your card in the envelope. So we're responding to that. And then the response to the budgets is something like this. Okay, here's our 3 phases. We're thinking about the middle piece being the design phase of, well, we've been teaching the good old 7-day charrette for a long time now, but maybe there's some other ways to cut this sausage up. And you can go to a 1-day, 5-day, 1-day, spread by a month apart or so, a 2-day, 3-day, 2-day, or a 1-day, 3-day, 1-day. And our courses are going to be starting to ask people in their case study methods which ones and how do you make that decision. And my final slide shows this new one from NCI, which tracks project complexity of budget, time, design, and politics to process. The idea being the more complex the project and the more money you have, the more this is actually a 7-day charrette here, the more the 7-day model is for you. The miracles that can be performed in a charrette because you stay there 7 days are sometimes applicable to the most politically hot projects. But if, on this end, if you have a very easy political environment, not so hot, and rather easy design problem, and you don't have so much money, maybe you can get by with 1 day, 1 month, come back 3 days in the next month, and come back 1 day. But what happens in all of these are 3 feedback loops. 3 feedback loops, whether it's split up or not. So that's all I'm saying. I'd like...
I have one thing. I think when you first showed me the 151...
Yeah. Oh.
It's just the 151, the 141,
Mike.
and so forth. I think you should put the travel days in, because the 7 is really 9. The 151 is not 7; it's 11 days.
Okay.
Okay, and you know, I mean, you may be doing a charrette in your hometown, but it doesn't work.
Airplane. Okay.
Yeah. You see what I'm saying?
Well, this is the discussion.
Okay, so it's not, because that's too easy to just say, because who would not choose the longer one, but it doesn't turn out to be cheaper?
The way I'd like to, thank you. The way I'd like to, I've never run a session like this before, so I don't know how it's going to go. The idea is basically that we get these folks up here to talk a lot for a while and then move you guys in, unless you just want to butt right in, and that's okay. And David's going to help me facilitate. But, okay, back to, before we open it up to all these discussions, what matters to NCI? Because one of the things we're dealing with is, how do we become just another public involvement like IAP2? You hear that? It's International Association of Public Participation, which is a group that does a really good job at all the tools. But what's NCI about? Well, we've always been about the charrette. And what is that about? And so what processes can we model and still hold to our principles? So we put a few up here, a few important basic ones we think. That what we're talking about are projects that, yes, include cross-disciplinary teams, working early on together. That's basic. And collaboration and all of that. But the big difference might be these short feedback loops. So I put short feedback loops up there, and maybe we're talking about, I know Andrés talks about 3 of them. And then the compressed work session, you know, if there's one thing that differentiates us from other things, it's that we're going to do all this in X days. So before I start, panel, any other principles that we need to have up here besides those 3 that we want to make sure we're not going outside the bounds on? Ben, didn't you have one?
Well, my I guess my main concern is the idea of I think we find ourselves in a position now because of there are industries that have grown up that are participation industries. With all the technologies that are available now, the keypad and all these industries. And then you layer on top of that Twitter and Facebook and all of the social networking skills. And so I want to kind of sort of suggest that it's very easy to get distracted by all of these new opportunities, challenges, and forget the core principles of the 3-stage charrette method with a workshop in the middle. And as a matter of fact, I want to stake out the extreme Luddite position on the panel, if I'm allowed, but mainly because I come from a firm that has pioneered an awful lot of the social networking, blogging, websites. So I feel freed to say that that all that stuff is we've overreacted to all that sort of thing. I'm really concerned as a communications guy about retaining the power of the charrette for purposeful participation. If you don't define where you want to end up, and where you want to end up is providing transformative change in the neighborhoods and the communities in which you're engaged. That's the purpose. And so everything has to be, every process you use has to be defined in terms of its ability and its likelihood to achieve transformative change in the community. It's not about participation. It's not just about participation. It's not about the tools. It's about ending up with transformative change, and you choose the tools you need to move in that direction. And so I'm sure we'll have other people talk about it, but every time But I want to be the Luddite. I want to say, forget the Twitter, forget all, all those sorts of things. If you can't figure out a way to use those tools for the purpose of purposeful participation that leads to transformative change, then don't use them.
Purposeful. I'm going to go ahead and call on Eliza, being from another generation than you've been on the first panel. And regarding the social media and distance participation, what do you think of the opportunities and challenges?
Well, I think you touched on one thing, which is knowing what social media is capable of doing and knowing what it's not capable of doing. One thing that it could be really great at doing is actually getting people to show up. And that's a lost opportunity if anybody's not doing it. Something as simple as Facebook ads. Facebook ads are really powerful. That may sound silly, but they can be highly targeted. You can target them to a zip code. You can target them to an age range. The amount of targeting you can do for relatively low cost is very high. So I think using it to get people to show up is a no-brainer. As far as distance participation, it's certainly not a replacement for having people on site. We actually, even for some CNU initiatives, we've used distance participation, and it's a minority of folks who participate in that way. The majority still has to be physically on site to have that face-to-face interaction, but you can use the social media as a way of broadcasting that information to those who can't be there. But the assumption is that you really want to have a critical mass of people there in person.
Good points, Eliza. And, I think from a social media perspective, while I don't necessarily disagree with anything you said, Ben, I think that, all social media has, and many of the web tools that we have in addition to social media, what they primarily do is speed up what's already happening. So if you're doing really great work and you're engaging people in a meaningful exchange of ideas, social media is a very great tool to make that go faster. However, if you're in a confrontational stalemate with entrenched groups of people, it makes that go faster as well. So I think a couple of things. So we're talking about technological tools, things like keypad voting and online voting, both of which I think have this tendency to allow explosions to occur quickly, partly because you can manipulate. Not that I'm willing to share right now. But so understanding what your constituency is already, the dynamics that are already there, and then tapping into those positive dynamics. So, using the Facebook and the Twitter, the Facebook events are fabulous. We were talking this week about return on no investment, or return on very little investment. And so those tools give you that capability, but the returns aren't always positive returns.
Yeah, a good point is that social media is networked based. So whatever network you tap into, it will spread in that network very quickly, whether it's the support or the opposition or a certain age group. But just because another group of people are on those social media outlets doesn't mean that they'll get tapped into unless you get at least one person from their group involved to begin with.
Right, and just as in a traditional charrette environment in which you're facilitating a conversation, moving it forward over time, helping to dispel some misconceptions, social media has that capacity for dialogue. So tapping into those networks and then starting that conversation that helps advance. I
do want to say, we have had good experiences with the keypad voting in person. My feeling on it is that it allows one very loud person can take over the conversation very easily, and it can diffuse that. So it does it's good for taking the temperature of the room. If you've had bad experiences, I would be interested to hear about them. But
no, I haven't. I think, yeah.
Okay, so I love what Ben had to say about, the whole purpose of this is transformational change, which means there are some group of people who are going to have to make decisions to make that change. I actually think social media is not good for dialogue. It's good for sort of generic conversation, but I wouldn't call that dialogue. It's not the kind of dialogue where people can work out differences to reach common ground.
Call it thick and thin.
Yeah, it's asynchronous and it's essentially one way, and then I may read what you say back or I may not. It's not me and Ben, going back and forth over and over again until we can come together in some way on common ground. So I think it's great conversation. I wouldn't call it dialogue.
It's
not
reporting.
It's not consensus building.
It's report out. Is that?
No, it's not.
No, if you're using it to report out, you're not using it well.
No. Well, I was going to stay out of this.
No, you can't do
That
that.
was my first instinct. I really agree with Jennifer. And I think that the social media is terrific to let people know that something is happening. Right? So instead of having to do essentially what used to be like a political campaign, you had to go get your diversity out there in the neighborhood and so on. You can do that very efficiently with the media. The reality is the purpose of any participatory effort is to change people's minds. I mean, to reach a point that is different from the place that people brought in when they came to your meeting. And if we don't do that, there's no purpose of doing public participation, because otherwise we just keep our own opinions, and they're probably misinformed opinions, and we're going to continue doing that. And so I think that we have to really be very clear about the fact that if we want to move forward on something, if we want to reach consensus, that has to happen as a result of face-to-face dialogue. I don't think there is a substitute yet online. I mean, I haven't seen it. And, I do this every day of my life. I've been doing this for 30 years. And so I think that let's use the media. Let's use the media for spreading information, for let people know. I also like the Twitter thing, because it's great for people that are tweeting other people who might be on the shopping mall so that they know that something is happening. It creates this kind of peripheral knowledge. Otherwise, all that we get out of the media is a snapshot of what people think at the moment without having any dialogue, without any opportunity. And the reality is that any participatory process, in addition to being participatory, is educational. We learn from it. And we're not going to learn it just by tweeters.
Actually, I'd like to confirm the last thing you said and actually propose that the earlier thing that you said wasn't the only way to do a charrette. There's a second name for charrette, which is inquiry by design, which is what they use in Britain. And actually, although probably I came up with the name charrette as far as I can tell, inquiry by design is actually a better term. At least the way we run a charrette, which is this. Gianni said that what you wanted to arrive at was consensus, what you wanted to arrive at was a kind of convince a group of people. I've actually, although I began that way, the way I run charrettes now is I want to find out what the trouble is, I want to find out what the poison is, I want to find out what the very worst they can do and think and say. Okay, so that I can vaccinate my project against the worst that they can throw at it, specifically for the public hearing. If you become very skillful, and I am skillful at this, of convincing people, by the way, we have all the tools on our side, we have the renderings, we have the experience, we're paid. It's an asymmetrical relationship. We're paid, you're not paid, we have everything on our side. I can convince you of anything, but what I really want to find out, I know that I won't, because in the hearing you'll still be there absolutely nailing me. So what I do is I stir the pot to find out what the poison is, and I leave a lot of space for everything to come out. And when I find that somebody's not actually telling it, I go outside and I go independently and tell me the worst you can do. And then I vaccinate the project, or at least I formulate what the response will be not if that comes, but when that comes up. So when it comes up in the public hearing, I will have heard it, and I'll say, yes, we actually dealt with it. Or at least I will have an inquiry. So I prefer inquiry by design. Now, this takes nerve, and people think I'm really weird and cruel and neurotic, but I actually stir the wound to see what the worst that can come up. And that's why our charrettes sound different from others. And if you want to actually report that it's really a horrible experience, which many people do, it is a horrible experience. But I'm not running for office. I don't have to be popular. What I do is I deliver the full Red Cross package to the elected official who in fact cannot sustain that kind of assault. What I don't like are the planners who are popular and then the elected officials end up being nailed. I think because
Andrés?
I can take it and they can't, and that's why it so often comes out wrong.
Andrés,
Yeah.
but you, so that we keep the conversation on the same plane,
Yeah.
you do that face to face. I mean,
No,
you,
absolutely face to face.
So
yeah.
that was the first,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
first things we were talking about. Do we do it electronically or do we do it face to face?
No, I understand, but you also said there was only one way to run the charrette. And I agree there is, that's exactly what you said several times. And there are actually at least two ways to run a charrette. And there's one which is, yeah, well, at least two.
Yeah,
There's at least two.
two.
And if I may just add one thing that I've also learned. If I had my druthers, I'd have the charrette with the elected officials directly. I remember seeing a process, I don't know, it was a long time ago. Actually, it was in North Hillsborough County, in which people would come in and take up a huge amount of my educational time. You know, somebody would come in and I'd spend a lot of time. The elected officials would just peek in. He's listening, good. So the people who were present there, who were more or less nobodies, right, people who happened to have the time, were absolute experts. And when I presented the North Hillsborough plan to the elected officials, I had half an hour, just half an hour. So the least informed people in the county were the elected officials.
Right.
And of course, they didn't know how to make the difficult decisions because I'd spent the time with the people instead of with them. What I would do now is, if I could, I would reverse it, have the elected officials attend the charrette, and have the people watch them. I would actually reverse it, and that would be, I think, more democratic, actually, because the way our democracy works is through elected officials. It doesn't go all the way back to the people. That is an utter perversion, and it's called a mob. Okay, that's what it's called. We're a republic, and they're elected officials, and I think it's a scandal that sometimes they're the ones that know the least what's going on. I think it would make a great deal more efficiency. Well, we should argue that. Don't let that stand.
Former elected official over here.
That's a good segue. I'm a former elected official who did a charrette with Bill. It's called Charette. It's a very complicated, highly charged project. So I guess I would weigh in from my perspective on a couple of things. One, I can see where social media would be extremely effective relative to outreach and getting people involved. That's very, very clear, and the ability to do that in a very, sort of scalpel-like way can be effective, I think. I also agree with what's been said about the importance, however, of having people participate in the room. And I was an elected official who was in the charrette also, which is very helpful if you're in an elected position. It's great. It's the best. But I would say, for me, in that process, just adding on to a lot of what's already been said here that's very good, two things. One, the educational part makes all the difference in the world. Even very skilled, responsible elected officials can talk to their constituents till they're blue in the face. We don't necessarily educate them and change their minds and help them transform. The charrette process is magical to be able to do that in terms of my perception. The second thing, and this is the last thing I'll say, is that the other thing I believe it does for elected officials is, and again, this requires that the people be in the room, and it also, I think, is enhanced by the fact that you do the 7 days or the 5 days or the whatever you're doing in a compressed time frame, not strung out too long because you lose all of that. But it's the fact that it puts citizens in a position where they not only get to express their opinions and get educated along the way, hopefully, but they also have to be responsible. The process sort of encourages citizens, I think, to become responsible. And as an elected official, what that allows me is that if somebody is in the room, and I'm in the room, and we all talk about whatever, and then we all agree on whatever the final thing is, and then they come up in front of me in a public hearing and completely turn it upside down, that helps me as an elected official know how to assess that and how to evaluate that.
I think you said something really important, and that was the experience. And really, in a lot of ways, I think the charrette is an experience. You could come in and do your planning and coding in a small fraction of the time that the whole charrette takes. So I think we've all established that social media is a tool for getting the word out, for limited amounts of engagement, but maybe we should move beyond that, because I'm not sure that really drilling down into the details of social media is the right thing. So really, for me, the big question today is, what does Charrette version 2 look like? And, you know, the majority of people who aren't at the Congress this year or haven't been in the past, you know, we see the word charrette used to describe a 3-hour meeting all the time. So it's really kind of frustrating that that word that you've defined has been then Kleenexed into a bunch of misapplications. So for me, it's a couple of questions. One is, how long do those continuous days have to be to have that sort of experience with the elected officials and the people to actually move the conversation and the meaningful dialogue forward in a way that has lasting results? And I would argue it's not the shortest amount of time possible isn't that 131, because of what Susan said about airfare. That just isn't feasible. It actually makes it much more expensive over time than just putting those days together. But a 3.5-day contiguous engagement for me is the shortest charrette experience. And then, you know, like 1 day on site before, probably 2 trips on site after is so phase 1 trip, charrette 3.5 days, phase 3 2 trips. For me, I think that's the shortest thing I'd be comfortable defining as a charrette.
3.5 days, and then
Phase 1 day.
1 day.
Not necessarily more.
Ben says more.
Okay, we're gonna get to this.
Okay.
Can we hold? I'm going to draw this, but can we hold?
Okay.
I was going to hold this part to the end.
But can I just take a 1 minute to disagree with everybody?
That's why you're here.
Okay. I disagree with Andrés, first of all. Andrés and Bill trained me in the charrettes, so that was my model. And I think one of the worst things that a lot of practitioners do is follow Andreas's model, think they can do exactly what Andrés does on charrette, and he intentionally undersells his ability on charrette to insult people and then get great results in a very short period of time, how quickly he can turn people. Those of us who go out and try to imitate that get in terrible shape. And if you shrink the charrette down so that you don't have time to respond to the venom that rises up, you know, you get all the venom coming out, which is, and I agree with Andrés, you've got to face that at some point. I'd rather face it in the pre-charrette area than in the charrette. If you're shrinking the charrette down to 4 days, then all the venom comes out, then you spend all your time dealing with venom. And now you're in trouble. Now you've got to add more days at the end to go back and fix the things and all the ugliness that came out in the charrette. And so my big concern right now, my concern is that we have in cutting down the budgets, we've sacrificed that pre-charrette preparation part, and where we identify the stakeholders, find out where the conflicts are, and begin to shape the charrette so that we can deal with those. The early meetings in a charrette should be affirmation of what we know from the pre-charrette area. They should not be discovery periods. And so I'm not so big on the idea of using discovery by design or that sort of thing. I think by the time we get to that shortened period, we better have a really good idea of what we're going to face in order to accelerate the design part.
Yeah, I just want to tell the folks out there that hands are going up.
Yeah, I know, but that's not the
I'm going to try
way.
and get you,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
I see you.
Just a
Okay.
couple. Because there are a couple things that I agree with Ben, and I think, and I'm not sure we've ever implemented this very clearly. But the first thing is to design who participates and who makes the decisions. Okay. Now, one of the things that I heard about Perth, Australia. Let me just give an example of a school. When a school needs to be located in a place, we ask all the neighbors to come in. All the neighbors are going to be against the school because there's nothing but traffic. That is not a democracy. That is a self-selected mob that we've enabled, and a mob is self-interested and in fact specialized. They have a right to speak, and we need to identify that they're the neighbors. At the same time, there's the community as a whole that actually knows that there's a school that's necessary and that that's a good place. And what they do in Australia is they use a random sample to bring the people in, which is called the community as a whole, and then they invite the neighbors in, and the neighbors represent themselves. They're the neighbors. But they do not confuse the neighbors, which is a vested interest, with the community as a whole. And I think the reason we have such lousy outcomes so often in America, to the point that we think democracy doesn't work, this has got to be top-down. There's a lot of cynicism about Charrettes. It's not that democracy doesn't work, it's that we haven't been running a democracy. You see, a democracy doesn't need a huge sample, but it does need to be a random sample. And we always have tainted samples coming in. We have all the old grouchy people from the condo next door. We have all the immediate neighbors, you see. And I think what they're careful in doing in Australia is by using, I believe, the jury pool, which is a random sample. They also bring in the community as a whole. And then the elected official has a chance to hear it from the school board, to hear it from the neighbors, but to hear it from the community as a whole, which is usually intelligent, and that's where they get their cover.
Okay,
so we need to design that method.
I'm going to toss it over real quick. I'm going to get to you, sorry. But David Brain, who, just to add part of his resume, he's a professor of sociology. So he brings, and he teaches this course. So to put you on the spot.
I agree with the idea of using a population that's a random sample to counterbalance the usual particular interest that you might get. But it would be a mistake to think that that's a more democratic way to go about it. Eliza pointed out that the thing about social media that makes it so powerful is that they're networks. And you have to make sure that you tap into the right networks. Well, even if you're not using that technology, that's really the key. People process information, they form opinions in the context of their social networks. And to a large extent, we kind of tap into social networks kind of randomly and accidentally, and usually in terms of vested interests, which is why we need sometimes to do that random sampling. But the thing that social media can help with is not the participation during the charrette, but this process that Ben was referring to of coming to understand the social landscape going into the charrette. If you really understand the social networks and you understand how to reach the key opinion formers and decision makers, not just the elected officials. In fact, the better way to get to the elected officials might be to reach their networks and not them directly. Maybe they have to stay out of the charrette because they need to keep a little political distance from its outcomes, but you can get to them by way of understanding who they talk to and who they listen to. So the social media as a pre-charrette tool could be really powerful to help us understand what the social landscape is, what the structure of the social networks are, where the conflicts are. The more you can out those conflicts ahead of time, you don't have any surprises in the charrette, you're in better...
Does the social media have to be electronic?
Absolutely not. Absolutely
Right.
not, yeah.
You just go to a church and that kind of thing.
And that's the old way to do it. It's like the first thing you do is you go talk to the pastors, you go talk to the obvious organizational leadership and that kind of thing. And that's the old-fashioned way of mapping out the social landscape. But the social media stuff can actually provide a much more extensive picture, especially some of these new tools that actually engage people in discussion but also require that they register and identify themselves. There's some data collection and social mapping possibilities in there that I'm not sure anybody's really tapped.
Eliza?
I definitely second the point that we need to tap into social networks, some of which may be online. And I definitely second also the idea that you can win, if your client is the planning department or some committee, you can win your client, make them very happy, and then lose the vote at commission. We've had that happen. But the topic that I actually wanted to talk about was the one Ben brought up, which is the poison in the water idea. And I want to bring up a potential, maybe we need two different models for if you are doing a charrette in your hometown versus if you are the outside expert coming in. And I think, obviously, it would be poisoning your own well is a little bit more problematic.
I'd like, that actually goes with what I wanted to bring up. My name is Julie Hussey. It was Julie Kofer. Now it's Julie Kofer Hussey, I guess. But I had the opportunity to work with Andrés in the very beginning. And one of the things that I'm hearing from what he's saying, which is so true, is he is the most wonderful listener. I mean, he really wants, when he's talking to someone face to face, he really is interested in what they're saying. So when he really is seeking that poisoning, he really is doing that. And that is one of his greatest strengths, and it's wonderful to be around that. I worked with him, went and did some pre-charrette work a very long time ago, and then decided that I really didn't like to travel and I liked my own town. So I have gotten involved in a lot of public infrastructure projects in our community. And so now I'm teamed on a lot of teams with people that are coming in town doing land planning, doing these different things. And I'm telling you, as the local person, if you're not listening to me and I'm on your team, I don't believe for a minute that you're listening to the community. And I don't know how to tell you that if you're not listening to me, you're not listening to the community, but that is the case. And I think the reaching out to the public officials, I mean, those public officials are very scared about bringing in the community. And if you're working for an agency, they're very nervous about upsetting the public officials who are paying for them and for doing this. So it's the pre-charrette time that Bill is talking about is not a month before the charrette, we need to get out to people and tell people what's going on. It really does start way before. So the breaking it down, if you're using it for charrette activities, you just must make sure that you're doing that pre-charrette. And when I saw you say 9 months, I mean, I just thought, oh my God, if people came in and said, we're going to do the charrette in 9 months and we need to start being strategically planning for that, I could be absolutely instrumental as a staff person. Anybody could be absolutely instrumental in helping you have an incredible charrette of the time that you're there.
How often do you get
Almost never. Almost never. I have these are members of our group, not our group necessarily, but planners who come in a month before the event say, no, we need to have this event now, in a month. And I'm thinking, if you want to even get into a newsletter that's a monthly newsletter, I need it at least 6 weeks before to tell people. And so I think, maybe social media is quick, but the real social media is going to the churches. The real social media is getting out and things.
I'd like to really underscore that. I think that one of the Achilles heels of the charrette process is very often the reliance on out-of-town consultants parachuting in, and then they leave town, and then the locals are left not knowing what to do with what they're left with because the work hasn't been adequately embedded in local networks, and they haven't listened to the local team. And I've seen dozens of charrettes that have kind of blown up as a result of that post-charrette, what do we do now? And they didn't listen to me when they were here, and then the locals have trouble explaining what happened at the charrette to their fellows still around. So I think that's so important, and I would always tell any consultant who's traveling to do charrettes to really find a local team to partner with and take that local team seriously. You find the right team, the right people to be on your team, and take them seriously and listen to them and let them help you listen to the locals.
Has anyone tried to do like a speaker series leading up? Because that might be a great way to engage outside experts, but then have the local team actually do the primary engagement work. We've done that with some regional planning projects that we've worked on, had guest speakers come in and talk to the relevant committee over several months beforehand, and then have a workshop following up on that.
That's a great point. So we do that a lot with webinars to just make them attend in advance. But also, that's another way that blogs help educate people, help them start to understand the issues, help them start to develop a common language which we can actually communicate about the issue at hand.
Just quickly, I wonder if you could do something where if you did have some sort of online forum that you would get a badge for every time you actually attended a webinar. So somebody with 6 badges would have a lot more credibility on the social network than somebody with 1 badge.
Just in order to try to continue to boil the pot a little bit, I'm worried that we're talking like at 30,000 feet here, and we're talking about the kind of practical necessities here. Charrette's, Bill was instructing me in the technology and the process of charrettes. One of the things we talked about was the charrettes are especially effective in controversial situations, that the need for a charrette increases as the controversy in the community is higher. Am I correct? Is that still part of the curriculum?
Particularly the continual day.
Right. And so when we're talking about in an atmosphere with intense controversy, to use the word educate as a verb is an assault. All right? So I'm here to educate you. So I want to caution you never to use the word educate as a verb in a community you're working in unless you're talking to 6-year-olds. Because none of us want to be educated by somebody else. We want to participate, and we want to collaborate, but we don't want to be educated. So I try to correct that in all of our documents. We'll say we're going to do an education series. I'm not saying webinars in a controversial situation worthless. I don't think that's going to happen. Social networking, controversial networks, great. You're going to invite the people who already have a network of revolutionaries in the community to come in, and you're helping to empower them. No, the only thing that works is plugging into their existing networks on a face-to-face basis, showing them that you are ready to, you're ready to engage with them. You want to welcome them into the process personally, in person. It's a trust-building process in a controversial situation, and so you have to go that direction.
Yeah, and also listen to what they have to say and respond to what they have to say, because if we just go there and listen and then go to the charrette and do nothing, that's not particularly good.
The only way you can prove you're listening is if you respond.
Okay, actually I was going to say something else, and then Gianni said something. I agree with Gianni, Gianni, and but how do you respond? For example, if everybody who speaks gets an approval, for example, somebody that says, well, you imagine the stupidest thing you've ever heard, and you say, well, thank you very much, sir, for telling us that, and you write it down. And it's a clear stupidity. And then somebody else, something that's absolutely clearly intelligent. Well, thank you, sir, and you write it down. Well, what happens is you say, well, this is just sheer pandering, etc. There is no way that you can run a charrette without pushing back and saying, I'm sorry, sir, but that's a lousy idea. Now, what happens is that person you might turn off. I doubt that you will, actually, but that person you turn off. But what you do is you end up with a charrette in which all the intelligent people stay and all the dumb ones go. You run a triage. And by the way, there is no choice, because if you actually approve of everything that's said, all the dumb ones stay because they've never been approved of before in their lives, and all the intelligent ones go. And I have seen charrettes over time get dumber and dumber and dumber and dumber. You can't just run a popularity contest. Guarantee that. Okay, and you have to run a triage. Now, what I actually wanted to say, which is we have Emily Taylor wrote a book, I think not too long ago, that describes the new urbanism as being the first process, the first American in the pendulum of American planning, which is both process-based, i.e. bottom-up charrette, and principle-based, which is the charter. And the history of urbanism has been principle-based, like I am Burnham and diagonal avenues in Paris is the way to go. Or I am 1956, socialist and slabs are the way to go. That's top-down. Okay? And then bottom-up is the response. What Emily puts forth is that the new urbanism is the first planning movement that actually combines the both. And the principle, the top-down is the charter, and the charrette is the bottom-up. We are a movement of principle and process, charter and charrette. If all you run a charrette and say, I know nothing, the slate is blank, I am a Martian, I am just listening, okay, I think you're really underplaying and actually making the whole thing stupid. However, the ideal charrette for me would begin on the assumption that if you've been hired, they know who you are and you stand for something, okay, such as walkability, etc. And what I'd like to do, and I've done this once or twice, you take them through the charter, principle by principle by principle, and it's almost impossible not to agree that, for example, that kids should have access to elementary schools, preferably within walking distance. So you agree in principle. And once you've agreed in principle, and those are the first 2 days, that's your inquiry, then you say, now let's actually play the game in the home field. The school is going to go here, right? And then when people say, oh, wait a minute, that's nothing but traffic, etc., you say, no, the principle is that kids have to be within walking distance of a school. And you have something to push back on. Wait, okay? By the way, you should never have a mic. That's another process because you can't control me, okay? No. No one lets go of the mic. You should never have a mic. I'll tell you that right now. Or never let go of the mic. Yeah, that's what it is. Never let go of the mic. But let me just finish. You're not a good listener. You're not a good listener. Let me finish because I'm about to make my point in one more sentence. Got it? Okay. Now it takes longer. You can always, you agree on principles in the abstract. Okay, we have walkways, we have parkways, we have bikeways. Yes, we need those. So when one ends up being in the back of your house, and I ask you, this is where the bikeway goes, you don't have a right to clip it because you've already agreed on the principle of connectivity. And I think we need to actually be new urbanists and also appear with principle and then apply process and local adjustment to it. It isn't just process.
Let me actually also bring in the other end of the spectrum. I mean, I don't disagree with that, but at the other end of Catherine Reed Moore, who ran Bike Miami, gave a presentation at NextGen a few years ago that I was kind of blown away by, where she said, you know, we did this, we've had a lot of planning meetings, but the best planning meeting we had was Bike Miami, which was a open streets event. Because then they could get out there on the sidewalk and actually, instead of saying, well, in principle, we believe in narrowing the streets, they can get out there with chalk and narrow the streets and put chairs out and actually do a demonstration project of what they're planning to do from a planning perspective. Obviously, this is going to be easier if you're talking about narrowing a street than if you're talking about having a very large development. But in certain cases, going
out there and checking out
out there literally on the site and doing your project in sketch form on the ground could be a way of where they might disagree in principle because it's vague, because they don't really understand how it's going to look on the ground. When it's actually there, it's not nearly as scary.
And that's a really good point too, because I think one of the things we haven't really touched on yet today is the fact that there's there are different goals and strategies of every charrette. And, Charrette version 2 is a very different world than Charrette version 1 because now we've had 30 years worth of form-based codes and 20 years worth of CNU. And like the easiest charrette we at PlaceMakers has ever done is when Gianni had already established a vision in Kona and had this beautiful plan that he had, through blood, sweat, and tears, gotten major political buy-in. So when we came in to write a form-based code to implement his plan, it was like the easiest standing ovation we've ever received. And so, thinking through, and it was really more of a workshop instead of a charrette because it didn't need to do all of the things that a charrette did. It was really based on the deliverable. So I think that here today we could probably rarefy your matrix significantly with reasons for having it in the first place.
Just to add to that point briefly, you know how you know that you've done a really good job is when people stop participating. When they go away, when they say, okay, I'm confident enough, you guys know what you're doing, I'm going to go away. I have other things in my life to do besides sitting down and working through a zoning code with you. Scott Doyen and I in PlaceMakers call it the idea is you engage with the purpose of achieving disengagement. That's how you know that you're doing well.
But there's a slight downside to that, which is one of the things that happens.
Don't give him the mic.
Thank you. One of the things that happens is that charrettes are like the tide. Some people go away, but new ones come in, and then you have to start from the beginning. Okay, and then when that happens is you begin losing people that have heard it before. And you can't privilege the person that has just come in. You have to privilege the expert to further expertise. And so you might have to run minor charrettes or send people off with notes and readings, because if the question is always kindergarten, you will for sure lose people that are not yet ready to lose.
a twofold, one principle and one example, follow up on that. I mentioned the badges online. Learn from online what you can do in person. If you can do a badge online, you can also stick a badge on their name tag that says, I participated in meeting 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then you're able to differentiate. I have never tried this, but it's just a suggestion. You could differentiate those people who have just walked in from the people who have been there the entire time. And then they can also learn from each other. I mean, I've got a sticker that Victor Dover gave me that says, talk to me if you're new to CNU, because I've been here for a while. And so not only can Victor educate them, but he can delegate a bunch of other people to start to educate each other.
So Bill, what if everybody here was right, but you were right too, and we don't have enough money? So what I'm worried about is that Charrettes will become a fond memory, just like CN 1, 2, 3, and 4 were, where we can all get around and talk with each other. But if we don't have enough money to do 5 or 7 day Charrettes, and you're all right that it works, what's the hybrid? And what I was hoping to hear is what the hybrid is, because my clients can no longer pay me to do that. But the values of a Charrette and the interaction are still good. Now, we have our own way to do it, and you and I can talk about that offline because we're both in Portland. But, I think we have to get that interaction and get the preparation, but do it, frankly, with smaller budgets, or this will just be a very pleasant conversation that is irrelevant to a world with little dollars.
Well, I think we're all doing it with smaller budgets now, and we're all finding ways to accommodate. But the really good news is, in this very dysfunctional context, the good news is Charrettes really work. I mean, they really work, and so they're always going to be the default. They say we try everything else, every other stupid idea, we're going to end up back with Charrettes in some form or another. And we're all finding ways to tweak those, and I hope the NCI comes up with with the new version that works better.
Well, we have time. I was waiting to the end to talk about the money part, but this lady's been waiting for a while to say something.
Patience of a saint, which is the only reason we got through our regulations. Couple of things. One is, I think that a lot of what we're talking about is social leadership, and where do you find those leaders, and how do you diffuse the mob leaders? I'm stolen your word from last week. We did get to the point where the only people coming to meetings were the mob of 6. I actually have a much more derogatory term for them, but I'll stick with that in public. So the identification of leaders is critical. And the identification of leaders, and I learned this from when I was a union organizer, is that leaders are not the loudest people. Leaders are not the people who necessarily get petitions signed. Leaders are the people who have followers. And it's a very simple definition. Those are the people that you have to find. They may be the pastor. They may not. They may be somebody else who heads up the soup kitchen in a church. But those are the people that you have to find. And those are the people that you want to get on your side. The other thing is, you need to know where the power is. Not everywhere is the power vested with elected officials. Many places, I come from Hamden, Connecticut, the power is vested in an appointed planning and zoning commission. Legislative council has no voting ability on zoning regulations. Neither does the mayor. Neither does the electorate. There's no referendum for it. So you have to know where the power is to make that change, and you have to stay focused on that power. I knew 50 meetings before the end of the process that we were going to have a unanimous vote on the regulations. The question was, how do we reasonably get to that vote before the next election, before you lose those people? And the idea of a compressed timeline is absolutely critical. The other thing is, I learned a lot of lessons on this. We did a ridiculous number of public meetings, of which I attended all 178. I got lots of lessons learned from that, and don't anybody follow in my footsteps on that. Yes, after a 5-day charrette. We did a 5-day charrette with Robert Orr. It was fabulous, absolutely fantastic. And it was after that process that we had this 178 meetings. It was a killer personally. I have the claw marks on my back.
Why did you have to do that many?
Politically, I had to do that because we have civic associations, except we had one civic association that tried very hard to derail it. And so a lot of my effort went into writing the code and doing all of the legwork during the day and then doing the politicking afterwards. It's a much longer story. If you really want the answer, I'll give it to you later. But the other thing is, at some point, you need to polarize the public situation, and you need to be able to alienate those who are against you. You need to be able to discredit them and then alienate them. And when there are only 6 of them left at the end, and to this day they're trying to get me fired, when there are only 6 of them left at the end, I think we did a damn good job. But one of the things that I would do in order to not have 178 meetings is I would definitely investigate some kind of social networking. So when one person gets up and says, all of my neighborhood does not want this, we can say, nice of you to say so. However, we actually have data to back up the fact that you're wrong, so please sit down and shut up. I'll do that now.
You're being filmed. I'm just kidding. I'm not sure what Nancy's doing with that.
I was going to suggest, this is clearly something that is not going to be determined today, but I was going to suggest a reset. That was a word used yesterday. My reset is, my experience, and I've been doing this for many, many years, is that maybe we are looking at this only from the optic of a process of participation which is antagonistic. And perhaps we have to think differently. I think perhaps we have to think that seeking of the leaders that you're talking about is really, I call them the stewards, is identifying the people that are going to support you throughout the process. And to do that, you're going to have to take a positive approach to this thing. So, and I understand that I've been involved in many, in fact, they call me up because somebody called me the NIMBY whisperer at one point. I seem to calm them down somehow. But you know, I think that we have to begin to think in terms of finding those leaders, finding those stewards, and empowering them in a way to be the speaker for the process. And I know it's difficult. And again, I talk about public engagement in a broader sense than just the charrette as the tool for doing that. But I think that we have to find a context or a tool that can calm the community, empower those people that are going to lead it anyway later on, and then perhaps do a charrette. So maybe there is like a softening of the beachhead or something that has to happen before. So
No, but he's...
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. No, I agree.
Well, actually, you're both right in the sense. One thing that there's something called subsidiarity, which is the theory of governance that says that governance only works when the correct level is making the decision. Like, for example, if there's going to be a new power line in the state of Florida, you know, from the wind farm to Miami, that is a decision, that right-of-way is at the level of the state, right? And yet we ask every neighbor along the way where the power line is going to go, you know, all 150 of them, whether they want the power line. The answer for 800 meetings is no, because the neighbor doesn't get to choose that. That's the wrong level at which to decide. And everything that gets decided, for example, Miami took a vote on chickens, and it came up with no chickens. Well, there are lots of chickens in Miami, you know, and the correct level is at the level of the block. What they should have done, and we all know about parking, parking is decided at the level of the block. And I think this design that you would like to find not just the positive people or not just the leaders or the power, but to design a system in which you say these are the decisions that must be made. There are 8 decisions, and this is the level at which a decision must be made. And then perhaps you run a public process that approves of the process by which that these are the decisions and these are the people to make them. And then you go ahead and have the charrette with the right people present.
It makes no sense whatsoever to have, as you said, every neighborhood or every house along the path of this big regional issue to have a say. But that process of identifying the leader is also part of participation somehow, because they don't, that is the thing.
Yeah.
That is the thing.
That's the design of the charrette. Yeah.
Okay, one thing, yeah. I noticed I missed my timing. I thought we were going to 3:30. And after you, I would like to find out from you all up here how you're dealing with the small budgets. What are you doing in terms of process, like GB wanted to know? So, sorry.
Well, I think this is a good transition to that conversation, because I've got two words that I think will help us deal with the new paradigm, which are incremental and local, which are already buzzwords within our organization. We have, when 20 years ago, there were no local new urbanists. So having a home team wasn't really an option. So that's got to change the paradigm. Now, sometimes bringing in local experts to diffuse a controversial situation can be great and necessary. But a lot of our charrettes should be able to be run by home teams at this stage in the development of CNU. And that's a huge cost savings. And so you don't have to deal with airplanes flights. Incremental. There's a city in my area where I know one of the planning directors is just going neighborhood by neighborhood and basically doing transit codes neighborhood by neighborhood. And that way and that's a subsidiarity thing, he only has to deal with the politics of that neighborhood. And then it can go all the way down to the better block tactical urbanism level, where all you're doing is changing one block. And the really exciting thing about that was mentioned in the tactical urbanism workshop earlier today is that then the neighbors see that block and they say, why can't we have that if it's good enough? And so that you create this domino effect where you actually can get huge changes resulting from very small changes done well.
Hazel, how are you guys doing charrettes these days? What do the smaller budgets I know you're dealing with?
A lot of what you just said, because coming up with local people who want to acquire one of your skill sets that you have and they don't, and so they're willing to work for a drastically reduced fee because that's part of their educational process. Sorry, Ben, but
That's not a verb.
So finding a local partner who's willing to donate some time in exchange for some knowledge base is really critical. Also, getting the planning department for instead of us having to come in and train them later on form-based codes, making them do a lot of homework, reading a lot of other codes like from the code study or whatever, or master plans, helping the local planning department really get up to speed and get in the game. Unfortunately, it's a shrinking budget, but as we've all said, it's an increasing level of public resistance. So, it's a dance.
Gianni?
That's fine.
Okay. Andrés, what about the smaller budgets?
I'm trying to figure out whether we actually have a policy, whether we figured it out or not. I'm not certain that we have a kind of plan, but there is a phenomena that occurs. When we're in a charrette that's only 3 days and it's not going to work, I actually start perceptibly not giving a damn. Okay? And so I stop trying to impose it. I actually start saying, well, this isn't going to work out. And somehow the responsibility of pushing something on, not just calling it education, but shoving at it and actually saying, hey, I'm leaving in a day and a half. It's your town. I don't live here. I don't care. You can go ahead and have your school wherever you can find the location. There is a kind of, one of the things we underestimate in a charrette is how often we're trying to actually shove something at people, whether we call it education or not. And the real zen, paradoxically, is to not care. I don't care if there's a good outcome here. It's not my place. And then they say, you don't care. Yeah, it's up to you to figure this out. And I have seen this kind of subtle shift in which suddenly everybody gets a lot sort of more open-minded or brighter because we're not shoving. And I think we don't think we're shoving things in a charrette or representing or trying to get something done, but we are. And I think that there may be something to letting them know that it's really their responsibility and not ours to get this to happen.
Well, the reality is that, and I tend to be involved in longer processes than charrettes, and the reality is that to do this kind of things costs money. And so the only alternative that I heard today is essentially what I would call transferring ownership to the community as much as possible. Because, and maybe provide the tool for the community, maybe the training, maybe something that the Charette Institute can get into that, and provide the training that is necessary so that once you do the transfer of ownership, it can actually follow through and there'll be results out of it. But it does cost money to do this stuff.
I'm Kerry Kupka, Neighborhood Association President, Greenville, South Carolina. And I just want to let you guys know you've scratched my itch. And I'm here because I feel like there's planners and city elected officials who are shoving stuff at our neighborhood. And I want to participate in that process by getting a response from my neighbors rather than a reaction. I can guarantee there's going to be a reaction, and I can also guarantee it's not going to be helpful. So I'm here learning about how to get a response, and I thank you.
Any last? I think 3:15 is our time, but please. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I have to say, even if it does cost more and so on, and it is a costly thing, number one, public engagement is here to stay. We're not going to be able to put the genie back into the bottle. So that's kind of a fundamental thing. Second fundamental thing is actually it is good because we do probably get further or better in better places than if we did not do it. And my last one is a little bit of a joke, but we should really be thankful that the opposition that we find is now Jane Jacobs. Because and that is that informed, clearly focused opposition. And I think that we have to live in this environment.
I want to thank our panel today. Thank you, guys. We may not have gotten to everything, and